Ну вот даже техника устала под вечер и немного.
Well, we see that even the equipment is tired by the end of this business day, and unfortunately, we're sorry for this particular technical mishap. But nevertheless, let's start our discussion. Thank you very much. You are very patient since you have lasted till the end of this day, and. Today we're discussing cards and FinTech, the perspectives of payment cards in the era of digitalization. Well, this is not a new subject for us because we've been trying for some time to find answers to a number of questions, namely whether the payment cards and bank cards that we are used to will still be in place for some time in the future. And we have certain changes among the panelists, and one of our panelists will have to leave us earlier before we end our discussion, but I don't think that that would be to the detriment of our dialogue, and it wouldn't diminish the interest to this topic. Despite the fact that the temperature in this particular hall is fairly cool, although we will warm it up by the questions that we will be discussing. So the topic of our discussion today concerns cards and FinTech and the prospects of the future use of payment cards. And let me start our discussion with some figures and facts. Here you can see that the statistical sources maintain that the classical payment cards remain in 2016 the main payment instrument, and last year we see a 15% increase of the use of bank cards, and in Russia the same amount. Well, we see the 30% of increase, and the total amount of cashless transactions in Russia, according to the Russian banking reports, for the first time exceeded the total number of transactions regarding the withdrawal of cash from accounts. And consequently, on the basis of the existing bank card infrastructure, we see very actively developing services as mobile payments and electronic wallets and internet online payments, which require different media. And I remember that last year representatives of international payment systems demonstrated various bracelets and rings which work as payment instruments. And so our task today is to try and analyze how these new devices and instruments will affect the existence of the traditional payment cards and what we should be ready for. So let me introduce the panelists. Oleg Krylov, president of R-INKAS. And this is a unique company that carries and transports public money, government money, and it's closely related to cash as such. And certainly I suggest that we use this speaker as the main opponent. So the company which deals with the cash money, and it makes money basing on the use of cash. And Sergei Radchenkov, he is the head of the SPK joint stock company that provides and promotes the new system. Mikhail Podoprenyanov, that's the Visa in Russia department manager. Mr. Zadorozhny, who is director of development Alipay in Russia and the CIS. Also representative of Promsvязь Bank, who and they are introducing into practice the points that we have been discussing, and also Mr. Osama Bedier, CEO and founder of a Poynt company, who started his career in the United States. He also worked for the eBay and PayPal companies, and now he is still at the cutting edge of payment innovations and is developing his own company, Poynt, and he provides smart terminals and also software for POS terminals and software packages for various retailers. And he is a very experienced market agent, and he has also experience of working with large companies and small and medium-sized enterprises. And so the first question I addressed to him: what are the main trends within the payment landscape that you can observe right now?
Thank you. Hello? Okay. Thank you, Alla, and thank you for everyone on the panel. I apologize, I do have to leave early. My flight, there's only one flight a day I can catch, and it's at 8 o'clock, so I have to leave shortly after speaking. So I apologize in advance. I'm also not used to speaking sitting down, so I apologize about that as well. I'm getting used to it. So I have a prepared presentation that I'll run through. Do I run through it now, Alla? Go through. Okay, so I'll go through the presentation now. It starts with a short story about how human nature sometimes makes us do odd things, and that includes especially with technology. Okay, there we are. And I call this myopia, which is the idea of being narrowly focused on an idea. Sometimes we do this in industry. We narrowly focus the definition of our industry to our detriment, or the quality of being short-sighted. We can't see past our understanding of something. And so this, I think it's related to where we're at. There's a space shuttle outside, so I figured I'd start with the space shuttle, arguably one of humanity's biggest accomplishments. Of course, seen here circling the Earth. So one of the true symbols of what human ingenuity and innovation can allow us to do. But did you know that that space shuttle is limited in how far it can travel? It's not unlimited, there's a limit, and that limit is based on the diameter of these two things you see on the side of the space shuttle. They're called solid rocket boosters, or SRBs in the US. The diameter of the cylinder determines the distance that the space shuttle can travel. So it can't get to Mars, it can barely reach outside of the Earth's atmosphere. And the reason for that is why can't they make the diameter bigger? It's made in the US, the US space shuttle is made by one company called Thiokol in the Midwest, in the middle of the US. And then it's shipped by train through the mountains to the launch site on the East Coast in Florida. And the diameter is limited by the tunnel, believe it or not, on the way to the launch site. So the reason it can't be bigger is it will not fit through the mountain. So I got to thinking, well, why is that the size of the tunnel? Well, it goes back to the railroad tracks that's slightly bigger than the railroad tracks. And the railroad tracks in the US have one standard gauge, 4 feet, 8.5 inches wide, which is an odd measure even for the US. So why is it 4 feet, 8.5 inches wide? Well, it's because the US railroads were built by English expats. And the English had that gauge when they helped build it in the US. And so why did the English have that railroad gauge? Well, before the railroads, there were the tramways. the pre-rail tramways, and they used the same gauge. So why did the pre-rail tramways use it? Well, before that, then the guys that made the pre-rail tramways were the same ones that built wagon wheels. So they used the same tools that were used for wagons to build tramways. So they happened to borrow the same gauge. So why were wagon wheels that gauge? Well, if you didn't want your wagon wheels to break while you rode through the roads in England, you had to fit it in these ruts in the road, right? And that was around the same gauge. So the wagon wheels were the same size for that reason. And so why did the roads in England have these ruts? Well, this goes back to the railroad. The roads in England were built by the Roman Empire. And so this goes back to the Roman war chariots having this gauge. I promise this doesn't go on forever. So why were the Romans using this gauge? Well, that's a very simple reason. It's the distance between two horses' asses. So to recap, the reason the most advanced vehicle in the world, the space shuttle, is limited in its travel is two horses' asses. You can blame anything on a horse's ass. But you can imagine a bunch of incremental steps limited what we can do in the future. And of course, you need a leapfrog from here, a completely different way of thinking so that you can break through. And of course, we're starting to see it now with lots of private innovation in space travel. Obviously, you've heard of SpaceX and Blue Ocean, and I'm sure there's many of these around the world now. But you have to think about the whole problem differently and detach from the incremental innovation. And I feel like in many cases, this is how we deal with payments. For a long time, we keep going on one approach, and then we have to rethink it. And so bringing this back to business, Theodore Levitt, who is a Harvard Business School professor in the 1960s and is credited with inventing in the US the idea of marketing, or modern marketing, he termed this phrase marketing myopia. Sometimes we look at our industry in too narrow a focus. And he said every major industry was once a growth industry. It was once something that's growing very fast. And then in every case, it stops, the growth stops, because they defined their industry wrong. And a great example of this is the move from the railroads to cars. The railroad companies were the biggest in the world at some point, but they did not become the car companies. Why? Because they thought they were in the railroad business, not the transportation business. And oddly enough, 250 million cars later, and one of the biggest industry booms in the world, the railroad companies actually almost all died in the process. And similarly, now the car companies are seeing a similar pattern because they didn't understand they were in the transportation business. They thought they were in the car business. And of course, we're seeing ride sharing significantly change the landscape of transportation. And almost every article you read these days, Uber or somebody like Uber is putting the car manufacturers at risk. So what does this have to do with payments? Well, interestingly, payments changes very little. In the last 5,000 years, only 3 real payment methods have taken form: coins, and then paper, and today, plastic, which is enabling digital payments. But those are really the 3 major transitions we've had through human history in the way payments happen. Each one reached a friction point where it was too difficult to do business in, and made way for the next payment method to become viable and successful. But it's also worth noting none of them have ever died. We use coins today, we use cash today, we use cards today. So the payment methods don't seem to die, they just get used less. And some people misunderstand this. Every single one of these payment methods had to solve for 2 things. First, sorry for the font there, reduce shopping or payment friction. It had to be easier to use than the previous payment method, and it had to increase sales for people to accept it. And this is an important value proposition on both sides, the consumer side and the merchant side. And in fact, in credit cards, the fascinating thing is even though they were not free, they are highly successful because they solved these two problems pretty significantly. So I hear a lot about PSD2 and UPI in India and faster payments in Russia. These are all interesting and important things to happen, but they alone will not make way for progress. Cheap payment methods are only as useful as the fact that they're being used. That means they have to reduce friction on the consumer side, and they have to increase sales for the merchant side to be adopted. And so stepping back and looking at a global view of this, the last 10 years and then the next 10 years, it's pretty fascinating. In the next 10 years, we will see cash finally not be king globally. It will not be the dominant payment method. And in fact, the two combinations of card, plastic and NFC, will begin to rule all payments. And wallets, which are seeing a lot of success, are all hitting a wall. They're all stopping growth at some point early, much earlier than cards, because of the lack of interoperability. And so interoperability between payment methods is critical. Cash had it, cards also have it, but wallets today do not. And it's something that needs to be solved before wallets have a chance at overtaking cards. So finally, I'll end with this. What does that mean from a business model perspective? Because interchange, the interesting thing about wallets, even though they're not taking significant market share from cards, they are changing the business model. They are forcing cards to be free. And so ultimately, I see interchange going away. There won't be a fee for it, or it will be commoditized heavily, so it just pays the bills. And there will only be two business models from payments that are relevant for all of FinTech. The first one is, again, if the job of payment methods is to increase sales, then it's on a collision course with advertising, because that's the job of advertising. And the data inside of transactions is more valuable for advertising, for targeted pay-per-performance advertising, than search or any other data indicator. So the data will be the most valuable thing in payments. It will also be used to make much better lending decisions. And so the two ways we'll make money out of payments indirectly is advertising and lending. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Osama. We have had a flight of fancy, traveled through times, looked into the future, but I want to go to take you back to reality. And we know that across different countries there could be different extremes. Take Sweden, where they have cashless economy, almost to 90% of all transactions, and the Swedish central bank is actually have to respond to merchants refusing to take cash. And on the other extreme is the technologically savvy Japan, where almost 90% of payments in cash, despite all the technical progress we associate with Japan. My next question, and I'm trying to move to the topic of cash. My next question is to Oleg Krylov. I wonder if here in Russia we will see a similar situation where cash will be not helping when you may be without your plastic or your smartphone, and then what? Thank you very much for your question. I'm very thankful for this invitation, and my presentation is a bit provocative. because talking about cashless by someone who's responsible for carrying cash across the country. But I want to remind you that we're getting our commission for servicing ATMs. But I want to be provocative. I want to provoke discussions and debates. To start with, we have over 9 trillion rubles cash in the economy. It actually grew 3 times in the last 3 years, although Russia has the biggest growth in terms of cashless uses. But the share of cash in the total money is 20.9 and is decreasing. 9 years ago, it was over 29%, and in 2008, there were 41. But well, the share is dropping, but the overall amount is growing. But it's not only in Russia. Worldwide, it's too. The amount, the mass of cash is growing by almost 5% on average across the world. We're trying to migrate towards cashless, but I wonder if it is possible, whether this infrastructure is ready for that, and whether all interests of all groups of population have been taken into account. During the presentation in the morning, Ms. Gonova was offered a very good example about the ATM standing isolated alone. And what do people do? They travel a few kilometers to do what? To withdraw their cash. And it's the only thing that they do with this ATM. Now, to move cashless in Russia, we need to have very good penetration of banking services out there in the provinces, and you need to invest in infrastructure more, and you need to protect electronic money better. We've heard that cash was there for thousands of years, while cashless has been a few years. And we know about the theft, about billions of cash stolen, and it is all to do with cashless. There's very much less lost in stealing in cash. And whenever something happens, people move to cash. To Japan, they are totally cash, all about cash. They're obsessed with cash. They don't like cards. Why? I asked my Japanese colleagues why. They couldn't explain to me. But so when they have those catastrophes, man-induced or natural disasters, Japanese prefer to have cash in their pockets. They have over 17% of cash in transactions, in circulation. When you can't buy your bottle of water or a bowl of rice with your cards, you want to move to cash.
There was an example made about Sweden. Later on, I will go back to that. And well, Italians and then the Swedes love cash, and they don't plan to get rid of cash. And so here, I will also ask you a provocative question about Russia. Try and buy a sack of potatoes from a farmer, and you see that, well, they would, with great pleasure, take cash from you as payment, but not plastic cards. And so the Russian specifics are as follows. So there's the problem of territories, electricity, access to electricity, and internet communication. So besides, according to some experts, up to 20% of all money that's in circulation is that's the agricultural sector, and certainly there people prefer cash. In order to enhance the digitalization of economy, a lot of attention should be paid and lots of efforts should be made regarding the promotion of other payment means, as plastic cards, etc. And so in order to increase the profit margins by using contactless cards and some other technologies, banks disregard the fact that some customers may suffer from that. In Sweden, for instance, there was a special law adopted regarding the ban on the selection of a preferred means of payment if it's to the detriment of the customer. In Germany, the structure of payment, the structure of payment system remains the same, and consequently. Sometimes we even cannot access an ATM which is stuffed full with cash banknotes, and the same is something that we see in Russia in our work. And so new technologies, the new technologies is something related to the control over cash. And in Europe, for instance, the attempt to withdraw from circulation 500 euro banknotes was related to the matter of control over the movement of cash, and it wasn't very successful. Well, the European companies that physically issue banknotes and cash, they are quite advanced in the technologies that they're using, and it may sound as a fantasy or science fiction to you, but nevertheless, we can nowadays technologically make all the banknotes unique, and as far as the devices that read the numbers and the security features of banknotes, they very soon, in the very near future, will give us information about the time when the banknote was issued, the expert actually that pushed the button that issued that particular note, and all the information pertaining to such cash instruments. And the support of such structures of the development of the cash turnover is impossible without new technologies, and also the companies that use such technologies in order to improve all the instruments of cash. I try to speed up my presentation for the sake of time, but I believe that the issue of new payment cards, the bank cards, doesn't damage our business, because cash, coins, banknotes, etc., they exist in parallel, and the technological development will also go hand in hand. We understand that cash may be losing its significance to a certain extent, and the scope of their use will shrink to a certain extent. But it's too early to say that very soon cash will become obsolete and will go out of circulation. Although a lot of people understand that we do need cashless money, or non-cash money. I hope that these microphones right now are operational. Thank you, Oleg. But nevertheless, we see that cash money is an element which creates a certain balance or bridge between various gaps within the infrastructure. Or maybe we can talk about psychological specifics of people, but since cash has been in operation for about 5,000 years, and certainly it would be too rash to try make predictions about their disappearance from our life in the next 10 or 20 years' time. And so anyway, in some amount, cash, coins, banknotes will still be in our pockets, even in the future. And although Osama has left us, nevertheless, he mentioned in his presentation that e-money and e-wallets have their own restrictions, limits, and they are not so popular, or they haven't gained serious popularity in the course of their evolution. At least, well, the projections at the beginning of their evolution did not did not coincide with the final results. And so my next question is to the company that uses very actively the electronic purses and electronic wallets. I represent the Alipay company. That's the largest electronic wallet of China, and maybe it's the largest mobile payment vehicle in terms of population. Certainly, the population of China is far larger than the population of other countries. So I can tell you about the situation with cash payments in that country, and because and in this country. And Sweden was mentioned, but I personally think that we won't have cash or plastic payment means. It doesn't mean that banks would stop issuing plastic cards as a means of payment. It's just the people would stop using them. Now a few words about how the things are in China. So Alipay is part of the Alibaba group and is a system of escrow accounts for the purchase, online purchases of goods on Alibaba-owned platforms. Right now we have over 335 million sellers and buyers, and at the time of major transactions, we have at the peak hours, we have over 320,000 transactions per second, and over 50% of the e-commerce of China are processed by Alipay. The Financial Times conducted in the May of 2016 survey regarding the most frequently used means of payment over 3 months. And so the respondents here are marked in blue, represent large cities, and so white towns, mid-sized, and dark blue, that's small villages. So you can see that Alipay outpaced the cash payments, to say nothing about the plastic cards, which are called here as debit cards. So this spurt was observed over the past 2 years, and it can be explained by the fact that China has reached a critical mass of smartphone users. So over 70% of Chinese are actively using smartphones in their everyday lives. And it's quite natural that major mobile operators and service providers and banks try to secure portions of this population so that they could promote use and promote their own services and goods. Later on, I will talk about services which are not directly used to financial services and transactions, but nevertheless are actively used by companies in order to increase their client base. That comes a bit later. So we have a number of solutions for hotels, for instance. So the hotels have a checking-in procedure. In order to check in a person at a hotel, one has to stand in line, then go through the quite complicated procedure of verification, identity verification. That's all in accordance with the Chinese legislation. And so in China, the situation may be more acute as compared to the Western countries. And also hotels see that the loyalty to the brand, to the network of hotels, is not resolved. And that's why Alipay offers a service of reserving hotel rooms through their e-wallet and also go through the check-in procedure using their smartphones and specially proposed applications. You can scan a barcodes and pay for your stay at the hotel. Face recognition applications help verify the identity of the client, and also it certainly enhances the loyalty issue, and the hotel has lots of problems resolved without their participation. And so by using this appliance, this platform, we see that the number of the time spent in lines at the check-in counter went down from approximately 1 hour or 1.5 hours to 10 seconds if they use the smartphones. And so this technology uses those issues that governments and businesses and common people face. Another example, that's the medical sector and polyclinics and outpatients clinics, again, registration, payments for services, the standard approach and the standard procedure, that's first and foremost, again, booking, then standing in line, waiting for the doctor to receive you, and also the payments. Here you can see before and after. Before, that's the picture on the left-hand side, before the automated services were introduced, and on the right-hand side, after such electronic applications were introduced. It's far more convenient, not only for the people, but for the healthcare system as well. Some more details about the system itself, ecosystem, art and financial. So the Alipay is the brand which is in the center of this system, the mobile wallet, which is linked to it, and to the mobile wallet you can see well, insurance services, well-being management, and welfare management, and etc. And for instance, the money market, the largest money market in the world, Yobao, which outpaced JP Morgan in New York. These are actually the deposits, so the money that was that are deposited on the accounts with Alipay, and sometimes these amounts are quite small, but due to a large number of such amounts, we see that the number of deposits in Alipay, within the Alipay system, is far larger than the number of deposits at JP Morgan. So the merchants, over 8 million restaurants, supermarkets, and other merchants are connected to the service. And right now we have over 200,000 merchants outside China that are already receiving payments via the Alipay system with the help of the Alipay application. So what's the main difference between this particular instrument and the traditional plastic card payment systems? Because we have a large number of services, and we have approximately 5,000 user tags, which are split into financial and social parts, and by using smartly such data, one can, in a very educated manner, build the loyalty system, both for the client and for the merchants. So it can ensure targeted advertising and promotion campaigns, and so this wallet can be installed as an application by a physical entity, by an individual in his or her smartphone, And once such installation is complete, they can actively use this service. Well, unfortunately, in Russia, we see a certain ceiling that is, let's say, you see the coupon section in the Alipay wallet. Here you can see the number of merchants and POS terminals which accept Alipay as a payment system. You can read about the ratings of all these stores and facilities and merchants, and you can see the opinions of other clients that have had previous experience with this or that entertainment area. And so here you can see the business card of this of the store or supermarket. And so you can see in red, 2 coupons were placed by this retailer, and some promotion actions which are launched by this retailer. And actually, those pairs that have seen and have downloaded this particular coupon and site, they go to this particular store and enjoy discounts, and just as a physical coupon. Previously, lots of paper was used in order to distribute various flyers, etc.
There is the loyalty program inside the e-wallets, the most mass-oriented one at the bottom of the pyramid, and then you go up depending on the amount you spend over the period. So you could target your offers or those of your retailers to a specific categories. This is an example of cross-marketing. When you paid with your mobile money, you can show them some mobile app or that of another retailer next to you, close by, around the corner. Alipay also got their own credit pay and credit pay, which can be used as a source of funding for payment, and the user can rate the priorities of different devices they've got on their e-wallets, and these are cards issued by Chinese banks and the Alipay credit line. Well, that's basically all I wanted to tell you. The value of e-wallets may be higher compared to payment cards because the smartphone is a window open to you to knock on the door of your customer. And using your mobile interfaces, you could significantly improve your offer to the merchant as the acquiring bank, or you improve and you offer a much better user experience to consumers. Thank you. My question to you, when you come to Russia, what do you use more often, e-wallets, cards, or cash? I live in Russia and I use cards mostly to pay at POS, and more and more often I've been using mobile payment solutions available in the Russian market. Do you have a lot of stealing from those e-wallets? What is the percentage or the level of frauds? It is almost by an order of magnitude less in Alipay compared to the Visa or Mastercard industry standard for only one reason. It is linked to the smartphone and geolocation. You can use timestamps to identify who exactly is paying with that specific device at this particular merchant. If there is suspicion of fraud, the transaction is stopped, or you are prompted to use some additional PIN code. So the level of security is very high, but of course, it is still the rule that you're not allowed to tell your PIN code or password to others. So this instrument, as others, have the same risks. You can't have 100% secure, not in our day or time. I enjoy this information a lot. We heard from Bogdan how the Chinese use different payments, different payment devices, and we have prepared some statistics about Russians going cashless. And of course, it all depends on the type of payment, that is what you're paying for. So the internet banking is one of the most popular when you pay for your utility bills or the internet or your mobile operator. Cards are used more often to pay in the internet shops. E-money is not that popular, but they're used mostly in the internet commerce, in e-commerce, and you also use your money on the mobile phone for that. It is not that easy for plastic cards to stay where they are if they're just limited to payments. My question is to you, Sergey. So what do you do to continue to have cards popular? Should they be having something added in terms of functionalities? Thank you. Good evening. We seem to be having an onslaught from all angles, but don't fear. As we've heard, cash has been assaulting us for years and years. We should be philosophical about that. I don't want to waste your time, and I thought I'd speed up in trying to convey to what I wanted to say. Over the time that we had Mir cards, we have issued over 21 million. The question is, and has been, what is the commercial benefits of our cards? And I used to say, people always wanted bread and circuses, so our purpose is to make the Me card as attractive as possible. So we're investing everything in various loyalty programs, which are unique technologically, conceptually. We launched one 2 days ago. So you should go to our site and find everything you want to know. But it's not about loyalty programs I wanted to talk. I wanted to say that although we were discussing commercial benefits and commercial attractiveness, I want to get away from only and disconnecting ourselves to the states and salary programs. We're here to discuss FinTech, and they keep asking us what sort of payment cards we want, biometrics, security, and what could be the added benefit of our national payment system cards is something that we haven't yet mentioned, which is exactly our link to the government and non-payment functionalities, which are very important. And we have been focusing a lot on implementing non-financial functionalities as well as payment functionalities. functionality, something useful for both the consumers and the government. One of examples of the kind is our joint program with the Social Security Fund on direct payments onto Mir cards. And why am I telling you all that here? We want to make our cards socially convenient, comfortable, and of use for our individuals. Almost everybody is covered by various social allowances and payments. They usually took up to 10 days. And you know, and it is still the fact, the Social Security Fund piloted a payment to individuals project, and it still requires a lot of papers to be filled in, errors made, lots of time for crediting the cards. But we are launching our new program very soon this autumn. Bank of Russia is involved, the Federal Treasury, Ministry of Finance, and our system. The idea is that all the money, all the funds that are to be paid out in social allowance are to be credited to Mir cards. They'll make life easier for everyone from the point of view of transaction, seamless transactions, and shorter time. So this is replicable and scalable. It could be used elsewhere. Take, for example, the government support to various social categories, low-income population. I'm looking for words which skip my mind. Any kind of targeted support where you need to buy a certain type of goods, such socially discounted, for example, or part of the allowance package. And we could do that, offering good service to our public. We could offer such products as a migrant card, for example, for identification purposes. And identification is yet another area important socially. We still have those social cards in use. For example, that like Moscow social cards. In Moscow, it's based on our Mir cards. We could offer various privileges and discounts. And it's linked to identification, analytics, and statistics. It's a huge government objective, government program. And it is yet another example of us moving away from simply being a financial or payment device to non-financial. Or take, for example, transport, public transport. You use your social cards a lot there. So our objective and our project is something that we all need as consumers and as the government. You know that all of those transportation projects or public transport projects are completely isolated. They're not connected from region to region. You can't use your card from one region in another. Secondly, there are a lot of individuals who may have privileges in regions, and they are being treated separately. They don't have one uniform payment device, payment method. So we are offering our Mir card to be used across the regions. based on the banking application, so that you could use Mir as a payment card anywhere in the country, and offer all the available discounts or privileges when you, for example, using public transport. It's huge savings for the government budget, because we know the problems involved in the industry of transport, of public transport in the regions. So it's good for the government, and it's very convenient for individuals, where you just have one card and you could be sure you can use it anywhere. Yet another area would be something to be used for identification and biometrics. It's also relevant now to have on the payment cards certain solutions that would help ensure safety and security as when you go to various mass entertainment events. And there are many technologies available. So it could be tourist cards. It could be a culture cards, museum cards, or sports card, whatever. I seem to be rattling on, but I think that what our consumer wants is some benefit, commercial benefit, and the second thing is without overloading the card with too many functionalities. You would want to make this card having something else except apart from payments for students, for public transport, and so on and so forth. So what I was trying to say is that one of the factors for the card to survive as a payment instrument is to give it additional functionalities, good for the government and good for the holder. Thank you. Could I add to that? I liked what you said about not having the card overloaded. So you saying, by you saying that, we enjoyed very much with e-wallets. We have some share of the market left then. That's probably not true, but when I said we don't want to overload it, I meant, and it's good for any product, technological or financial, when it's too complex, too sophisticated, so it has too many things that you don't want, it may not work. It's too difficult infrastructurally. It may be too expensive. And I'm not giving any examples. I'm not naming names. We want to be polite. But it's still the case when there are many functionalities or services on the payment card platform and never use the way. We need to study a market. That's why I highlighted the most important things like entertainment or public transport.
Ну, конечно.
Well, of course, the non-payment functionality allows for various options, and certainly we've got to focus on the consumer, and banks should sell such products that are safe and reliable, and what they need, and sometimes what they don't need. Well, let's talk about another alternative area where we use smartphones as a payment instrument. Well, all the discussions that we have heard in the course of the day, I mean, all the potential options of our telephones, mobile phones, and You know, even according to some experts and surveys, they say that if it rains and the person went outside without an umbrella, he or she may will forget about going back home in order to pick up this umbrella. But if they remember that they have left behind their smartphone, mobile phone, they by all means would return to pick it up, because their whole lives are inside these devices. And my next question is addressed to Mikhail Prigalov, and we would wonder about those solutions that the company can offer regarding the transformation of the existing payments instruments. Thank you very much, Galina. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. Today we hear a lot about digital economy and the internet as the basis for such an economy. And certainly it would pay to analyze how the internet has been developing. It was three major technologies: the broadband transmission facility, the cloud technologies, and also the ability to communicate. And so we see that the internet is ready to migrate to the next stage of its evolution, or rather, I would say it's a quantum leap when all the devices which would receive additional consumer characteristics or features due to the fact that they would be connected to the network, then they would have this connection. So this is the Internet of Things, which is now a new term, and that is something that we would see evolve very rapidly in the very near future. The electronic payments evolution had the same sequence and the same underlying logics as the internet. It was aimed at the implementation of another basic need of the human being, namely to have an ability to effect payments safely and effectively and quickly. If we draw a parallel between the evolution of these two technologies and the internet, we can quite surely predict that the next stage would be a network that would unite all the devices with additional consumer functionalities, and that's a mandatory thing. Last year, we conducted a survey in major cities of Russia, and we discussed and analyzed the non-cash or cashless payment technologies and how popular and how well spread they are in the Russian markets. And we have found that every 10th user of electronic services in major cities with a population of over 10 million people are using smartphones as a payment means. Over 50% of large city dwellers who are using payment cards and are ready to use smartphones and other electronic devices in order to effect electronic payments. Consequently, the level of awareness about the ability to perform payments not only by bank cards but by other devices is quite high, and we can see that a large share of users is actively using the internet for online payments, and they're also using the cloud technologies, which we have already mentioned. Connected devices, this is a new market factor which is available everywhere. So smartphones is just it's one example, and also electronic smart watches and smart rings and smart other devices that we can see at this conference. if this platform, which incorporates into itself a payment instrument, is connected to a network, it means that it becomes available within the global network, the internet, and it requires new approaches to the protection of payment data. And when we talk about the minimization of fraudulent risks, then this is a competition, traditional competition between the bulletproof vest and the bullet and the sword and shield. And so it means that we will have to do a lot of legal work as well and technological work in order to change the existing standards and rules so that they would suit the new environment. And that's exactly what the analysts are busy doing. In particular in our payment system, when we use the elements of artificial intelligence in order to verify that this particular transaction is not a fraudulent transaction, and we also use AI in order to detect fraudulent transactions at the earliest possible stage. But there is also a third approach to this work, namely it means that we've got to make payment data quite useless for the fraudsters and hackers, even if they do get access to them. And here we have the following solution. So when the transaction is initiated, fake data or replacement data is used at the beginning of the transactions, and the true number of the card is revealed only after all the appropriate checks have been done. And so for various devices, tokens are used, and these are the smoke screen instruments which are used in order to protect the payment data. And so that was used specifically for all the pay systems in Russia, Apple Pay, Google Pay, and other payment systems. So the importance of such tokens for the payment systems and the payment means. And over the past 3 months, we've seen that we have seen a 27% growth of payment transactions, and it means that more and more people are starting using payment platforms other than the plastic cards. As for the platform that we are using, it's an open platform which offers support to the existing form factors for the existing payment systems, and also those which may be used in the future. And so this platform already supports the development of the Internet of Commerce things. Another fact is that we have opened our network to other developers. So we cooperate with the FinTech community and the participants of this ecosystem in order to implement the most promising of users' experience in the sphere of e-payments. That's something that my company is doing in order to make e-payment services reliable, convenient, comfortable, and secure, wherever you may be.
Thank you, Mikhail. I wanted to do a bit of a self-promotion. It is important that your companies focus so much on safety and security, personal data security. It is an important topic in itself. And it's true, we in fact see how fast change happens. Some 10, 15 years ago, we didn't have iPhones, Facebook, or WhatsApp, things that are so popular and common in use, very difficult to imagine 10 years, and that IBM will no longer be producing computers, Nokia, that mobile phones. It is even more surprising than that payment systems that have been here for longer have managed to adjust and adapt themselves to the change. And they remain an environment for attracting many, many innovations. Andrei Tarus from Mastercard is here to tell us what is the recipe for success. Well, thank you. Is there this device for clicking on the slide? My name indeed is Andrei Tarusov, and I'm working for Mastercard. And we've heard a lot about change, transformations. We hear it from everyone, from academics, from the banks, from the regulators. Everything seems to be in constant change, in constant flow. We've just heard about digital economics as an ocean, but it's always the front edge of change. And companies like mine have always been at the source of digital transformation. It's not so much important what sort of form factor you've got. So it could be a piece of plastic, it could be part of your wearable. And we're sharing our technologies with non-financial services for many years. You've heard about Zadorozhny in Tatarstan, where they've got 16 apps and only one is national. It's probably what you meant when you were talking about overloading your cards. I don't tend to agree with that. We've got very many different projects out there. Payment cards, plastic cards are changing. We now have tokens, which make transactions secure. One-off token you can use in different devices, and we see how mobile payments are getting there. They are being very successful. They've just been recent entries, and now they've got huge amount of transactions with huge velocities, and we didn't expect it to grow that fast. We seem to be catching on the United States in the number of transactions at the very least. But if we want to go back to the topic at hand, and we started by saying that comparing cards with cash, we still see them coexisting, and they may not be transforming as fast. There was a breakthrough event last year. If we take all the cashless, they finally overstripped cash by $500 billion. It happened for the first time, rather unexpectedly, but the trend seems to suggest that while we may still be expecting that cash will be around, it is shrinking. And I'm not saying like that cash disappears anytime soon, but even in terms of geography, this is a trend which is global across the world in all regions. The number of cashless transactions has been growing very fast. This is a global trend, and payment cards are at the bottom of it all, at the heart of it all, rather. And when I'm talking about payment cards, I mean generally, because while Bogdan was mentioning those e-wallets, you probably have heard about Masterpass, which is a wallet of wallets. It has been developing very fast. It's got a very broad functionality. And in that sense, this is a shared field. So we're having our role to play there as well. And if you look at the world in terms of being cashless, Russia is in the top 10, among top 10. There are countries where percentage when cashless is winning. Sweden. In Sweden, they've got stores where they don't accept cash for different reasons. We are probably too far away from that, and we don't know when we're there, but the share of cashless is growing. Here is what cards we have in this country, and there are debit and credit cards, but what is gratifying is in terms of statistics showing the change in the so-called average check. It seems to be decreasing, which means actually that individuals are using it more and more. We have a research that we conduct everywhere, including Russia. And I'm here to report to you that 26% of Russians use their cards every day for different purchases. In the internet or physical presence at post terminals. So clearly, for cards to be accepted, you need an infrastructure. And in the early naught years, there was this leap where the numbers of terminals and ATMs started growing and mushrooming. And although markets seem to have been saturated, the number of devices continues to grow. I always see the mentioning of imprinters. I never saw them in operation, and I don't know where they are and why they keep them. Probably for the time of a natural disaster when there's a blackout, but those imprinters are still there. And again, if I'm to respond to your first question, how it happened that for 50 years payment cards are still there, probably because they've been transforming themselves, responding to the need of the public. And while a plastic card as a physical object may go on one day, in other form factors, it continues to exist because of a certain element of confidence. And again, in any payments, trust and confidence plays a huge role. So whatever form factor they have, they still have the trust and confidence. Thank you. Thank you, Andrei. Our leading payment system, the international as well as national, they all have contributed their vision. I have a question to Algidris. He's our guest. And he's coming from a classical bank. Algidris, my question to you. how interested are banks in innovations, how they're involved in all that hype surrounding the national and international payment systems. Although they have all the market, they still keep working and on their services and improving. Now, what do banks do? I'm sure that you see payment systems stepping behind you. Thank you. I wanted to look at things from a completely different angle. Let me start when I'm being asked about innovations in the payments segment. I need to own up to the fact that each country is different. They are all unique. They're all very much distinct. I used to work in a Swedish bank before joining Selichos Bank. It's true in Nordic countries they don't like cash, but then take Denmark for example, where they allowed shops not to accept cash, but smaller merchants sometimes face problems in accepting plastic. Or take Africa, you've heard about a huge bank in Peso where they managed to resolve the issue of underbanked population. They didn't need any payment cards. They've got in Peso on the market that covers the huge country, villages, and this VTB ATM may seem a technological breakthrough, but Africans leaped over a certain stage in evolution of payments. And M-Pesa is a very popular case, but it didn't work for Sweden, and it failed as a business case in Russia. Or take, for example, United States, where they still have checks and transits on their books. For us, checks is a complete anachronism, but they promote as checks still. For us, it is anachronism, and again, we've heard about China today, and it's still an issue, a question whether the Chinese success story can be replicated in Russia. The good guys, they protected the market from various outside factors, and they grew their own local champions, but I doubt they could succeed elsewhere. We see some Chinese influence in e-commerce in Russia. This factor seems to be growing, but it's still to be seen whether Alipay will succeed. They want to come to Russia, but it's still a matter of question. Now, cash. The true function of cash is that it is anonymous, fungible. What does it mean? It means that as long as we have gray economy, non-informal economy, illegal transactions that the Bank of Russia has been fighting, and I saw those payment terminals many years ago where they accepted cash without any charges, whereby internet banking had a fee. And clearly, it was all based on cash, informal economy, and so on and so forth.
Well, And that's something that Sweden started to fight against several years ago, and they have resolved this issue. And so why does Sweden have so little cash? Because everybody pays taxes, because everybody understands why we need all those solutions. And in Germany, for instance, you would see some instances when some small chores, small repairs must be done around the house. Well, people try to avoid tax paying by hiring migrants and use cash payments. And so, well, why? If we talk about the trust to the system, and so when my landlord says, no, I would like to have some cash, well, maybe somebody would learn that we are renting your apartment. Maybe somebody would think that this is not quite right, appropriate, whatever. We're not talking about simplicity. We're not talking about comfort or convenience. It's just something totally different. Well, people just try to use cash. They want to use cash as an anonymous payment means, and certainly I think that I have very large expectations regarding their administrative levers and approaches to buy an apartment in Moscow or a Geländewagen by producing a suitcase of cash. That certainly won't do. That won't work anywhere. But again, the card-based system, you see, Russia is a large country, and speaking about a uniform standard as far as the information exchange goes, it never existed. And to some extent, these bank cards, plastic cards, they substituted for such a universal standard, and they have streamlined the procedures in this area. And as for instance, Poland is now going through a very painful process of developing and introducing uniform banking standards. Well, speaking about comfort for the banks, of course, when you take an interchange fee, for instance, in Europe, this interchange fee is virtually zero. So why should you issue some cards when you cannot make any money by selling this product? And so, well, if you issue cards in some countries where you can make money, so it's worthwhile. But then I spoke to a colleague of ours who became quite a large client. And so, well, even in villages, remote areas, everybody has to have a plastic card because it's a standard of information exchange. And even if the interchange fee is close to nil, to zero, it's just, well, free of charge for the client. That's something that the banks are doing because they want to promote their products, the system in remote areas. And that's very convenient for the customer because, well, it's again, a service is free of charge, it's very convenient, and they can make almost an instant payment transaction. And now if you have heard, of course, about the master chain. This is a system of real-time payments, and there is a high probability that such real-time payments would be free of charge. For the banks, certainly, that's the loss of a large chunk of margin derived from interbank transfer transactions, but nevertheless, it would be very good for the future, and also when you don't need a biometric data because you don't need any factor because you are the factor in yourself, and so this is part of a process which in English is called frictionless. I like this word very much, that this is a very obstacle-free process. So, in other words, all the things which create an infrastructure, if the master chain is launched, if the biometrics are added on to the system as a key or as an asset, certainly the situation would start working. In Russia, you have lots of payment systems, and it's the time for you to think about the future of such systems. So what would happen if you have a global payment system that would be used as a single platform by all banks, and it could add its own services as applications, add-on applications. I remember 3 or 4 years ago, people wondered about mobile acquiring and how they could use cards in order to pay for taxi, the taxi fare, and also then the mobile phones, and then the Uber comes and he says, well, you don't need any terminals, you don't need any plastic cards, physical cards. Is everything, all the information is in the cloud, and you just forget about payments because you have to travel from point A to point B. Well, the payment is transacted in the cloud. It's in parallel, and so again there are no standards, and so but nevertheless we have to take this technology into account, and if the master chain technology comes to the fore, which I hope for very significantly, it doesn't mean that cash would not be used anymore, not because it's comfortable, uncomfortable, convenient, inconvenient, expedient, inexpedient, but because it's anonymous. Once this anonymity feature is separated from cash, then cash will stop its existence. It will die, because that's the main principal point of cash. Well, in Russia, the central bank has a chance of becoming the principal payment system and introduce its own standards. Then it means for the banks the following. First, for the clients, if services or for merchants such services become free, and then banks would lose big money, fairly big money, in terms of services and products sold. But what we do acquire, we have to learn, and we are learning to monetize data. Our colleague Osama Bedier, who said that the main value that we receive from cashless payments, that's data. What was purchased, when was purchased, and we can make our conclusions, and we can predict the business development, and we can make money basing on such conclusions, and thus it would give us some bricks to build a new foundation for the next business, for a new business. Thank you. Thank you, Algedres, for your very interesting viewpoint, although I don't know why you said that the master chain platform somehow replaced the position and the role of the central bank, because, when the presentation on master chain was shown, nothing was mentioned about the central bank becoming the major global payment system. It's just certainly is not going to steal the businesses of its clients, and it would remain a supervisor and regulator. And so, dear colleagues, we have overstepped the limits of our program, though we tried hard not to do that. And this is an eternal discussion, and even now it's very difficult to put a period mark at the end of this phrase. Cash obviously will remain in circulation, and some oracles and futurologists who try to look forward into the future and still predict that cash and cards will still have quite a lengthy lifespan. Experts proposed different ways of transforming the functionality of such cards, how to combine financial and non-financial functionalities, how to focus more on the clients and consumers in order to retain such clients and also to enhance the attractiveness of plastic cards in their eyes, but at the same time, this flexibility and agility will keep us all within the trend. And for my part, representing the regulator, I would say that we certainly see new players in the market, and they are adapting to the Russian specifics, to the Russian consumer, complete with all the specific desires and wishes. Yes, true, people in different countries have their own national peculiarities, and the regulator is currently looking into this area, and with a view to not cutting off such services, but creating or reaching the balance between risk management and understanding of new benefits and advantages. And I'm sure that very soon the Bank of Russia will make public its vision of this work and its stand. I would like to thank all the panelists, all the audience participants. Thank you very much, and have a good evening.